Okay. But we will start at the very beginning. So let me pull it up. I'll read a piece of it, raise a question, and like as last week, well, I'll turn the floor over to Chris first. All right, let me screen share. Give me a second. Okay, so from the very beginning, I'm going to stop here, ask a question or two, ask Chris to take over, and once we're done with this, well, we'll see where we are in the conversation. But I think we'll go over really an important part of the story to get to an equally important part of the story. So these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abram became the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to God on behalf of his wife because she was barren. And God answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, if this is so, then am I this way? So she went to inquire of God, and God said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So that's a very prophetic statement. When her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Afterwards his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. And Isaac said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished. For his name was called, therefore his name was called Edom, which means red. But Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. Esau said, I am about to die, so what use then is this birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. And he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So this is our first interaction between the brothers, and it's full of symbolism and hints toward the future, and something else, and a lot of things are going on right here. So, Chris, I'm turning the floor over to you. Your reactions, your analysis of what we're reading, the symbolism. What do we learn about Jacob and Esau, and then we'll move forward.
Well, right from the get-go, we're exposed to a sibling rivalry, and the rivalry can be traced back to the womb, where they seem to be wrestling, much to Rebekah's dismay, as no doubt she was feeling some significant discomfort through this pregnancy. Early in the game, we're exposed to, if you will, twins oftentimes are thought to constitute a whole. They frequently are seen as complementing one another. And to some degree, I think this is true in my family. We have a daughter and a son who were twins. Somebody once asked me if they were identical. I said no, that they're a little differently constructed. But they're twins, and they divided up the world in very interesting ways. One became very athletic, and the other one became very artistic. And here you have a division with Esau and Jacob. Jacob becomes a kind of mama's boy, hangs pretty close to her apron strings, whereas Esau is this. The idea of him being hairy suggests that he's uncouth, but he's definitely his father's favorite because he's a hunter and he's rough and he's tough, and so again you have this very intriguing contrast between the two of them, and a rivalry that's already kicked into play, and then becomes further exacerbated by the fact that Esau is his father's favorite, and on the other hand, Jacob is the favorite of his mom, Rebecca. Very quickly, Jacob emerges as a trickster figure, and his trickery comes into play when he plays off of his brother Esau's appetites. The camps seem to be held in check, and he's willing for a moment's satiation to barter his birthright away. So what does that reveal about the character of each of them? Well, on the one hand, Esau is impetuous and evidently has difficulty envisioning the future or acting on the basis of the future. Whereas Jacob comes off, at least according to my reading, as a kind of a conniving schemer whose brotherly love is wanting. There's something that seems to be very mischievous and untrustworthy about the way in which Jacob conducts himself. Now, at this juncture, I think it might be worth highlighting a very interesting dynamic in terms of how both Christians and Jews read this story, because both of them read this story typologically, and this is extremely important.
Could you explain, just in case not everybody knows, what the word typology means?
Yeah. So Esau becomes a type that is associated initially with Rome, and then by extension to the church or Christianity. So this enmity, this animosity that is built into this very early stage of the story is seen as foreshadowing a dynamic that will play itself out in history. And the question of whether or not this dynamic can be broken or reconfigured is an open question. So on the one hand, Jews will lay claim to their patriarch being Jacob, and Esau gets associated first with the oppressive power of Esau, and then associated with the church. Now, interestingly enough, when Christians read this story, they flip that around, and Esau is seen as the well, he's associated with the Jews, and Jacob, the younger, is associated with Christianity, because after all, Christianity is the earlier sibling, the younger sibling. And again, this dynamic of reading an antagonism into global history is played out in the interpretation of this particular saga. Phil, you want to jump in at this juncture and add anything?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things that I really love pointing out about this story. Part of it is just sort of stepping back from the typological characterization. Still, we see in this story so far that neither brother is you don't have a good brother, bad brother thing here. They're both interesting, and they're both controversial. I think the text. I think there are things in the way the narrator presents us, Jacob and Esau, a sense that the narrator may not like Esau and may approve more of Jacob than of Esau. By the way, just by the things that are emphasized about him. But he comes out anyway. He comes out of the womb. He's already a hairy guy, and that's going to play out in the story a little bit later. And Jacob is standing in the tent making dinner, and you don't get any insight into his thought process. You have to infer his thought process from what he says, namely, I will make, if you swear, if you take an oath, I'll give you dinner. And the oath is you give me the birthright. And we're not given any indication here what the birthright is. I think scholars probably know. I tend to not be too certain what the birthright is. Later on, when he steals the family blessing, that's clear. We know what that is. I'm being a little uncoordinated here, but I wanted to point out those things that I pointed out and remind you that we are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? We're not the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. Nevertheless, we see Esau, I think kind of sympathetically in a couple of different places, even though I do think the narrator, as narrator, gives us some elements of Esau that are unsavory. But Jacob, there's nothing about Jacob now that we find likable. The moment we find something about Jacob that indicates some change in who he is a piece that we're not going to look at. That's when he wrestles with the angel. We're just, as I said earlier, we're just not going to have enough time to take a deep dive into every element of this story. So I'm not sure that was terribly clear what I said, but what Chris said was clear.
It seems to me that neither character at this juncture is given a kind of flattering and heroic profile. And this is something I really love about these biblical texts. You know, if you read a lot of classical literature, the hero of the story is frequently lifted up in a way that suggests that they're the power and almost a flawless character. And there's just this honesty about how both of these characters in some fundamental way are kind of flawed.
Yeah.
And I think that this it has a theological significance. And the theological significance is that the stories are demonstrating that God can work with very imperfect and flawed material and still do something extraordinary with that material.
Well, I agree with that. Now, Joan put in the chat that she thinks the birthright is a reference to primogeniture, which is the ancient right of the firstborn to the better part of the inheritance. But I don't think, I'm not sure that's true, because if it were, then the family blessing would already be given up to Jacob. Esau gets well, it's not written in the text that Esau gets. Well, no, I'm going to take a step back. Esau is supposed to get the family blessing out of the right of primogeniture. So if the birthright is to surrender that, then that part of this story couldn't take place. So I'm not sure what the birthright is, and it may simply be there as a foreshadowing for the big show that comes up a couple of chapters down the road.
Yeah.
So since, as I said at the beginning, since we want to spend some time at the very end, and I think at the very end we're going to be able to kind of roll back and talk about elements that we don't focus on so deeply. I'm going to run up to the meeting between Jacob and Isaac. So just in case you need a refresher, the chapter opens. Isaac says, it's time for Esau to get the family blessing. And so he calls Esau in and he says, I want you to go out and hunt me an animal and make dinner for me the way I like it. And Esau is off like a flash, not noticing that Rebekah is listening in. And she says, this isn't such a good idea, and calls Jacob over and says, look, I want you to go out into the pen and get a couple of goats, and I'm going to slaughter them and make dinner, and I'm going to dress you up like Esau, and you're going to go in and get the family blessing in this tricksterish way that we're already familiar with about Jacob. And Jacob says, Ma, but what happens if he figures this all out? And Rebekah says, then the sin will be on my shoulders. So I'm going to run through the text and bring up the point where the meeting happens between Jacob and Isaac. And this is all in light of the fact that Jacob, and beg your pardon, Isaac is almost blind, that this deception could take place. And there are a couple of really delicious elements in this part of the story. So we're going to run up to that part. Give me a second to find it. Well, the other part is that in addition to making the food, Rebekah puts the hair of the goat on Jacob's arms and gets some of Esau's garments and dresses him up to look and smell like Esau. Sorry about the name confusion. So let me.
Am I right? Is that the only scene in the entire Torah where Isaac speaks? Because I'm pretty sure he doesn't speak in the whole Akedah story.
Well, he doesn't
No, he
speak in the Akedah story, but there are other elements where I believe he does speak. I mean, he goes to war, and there's some issues about wells, which I'm not.
Isn't that the servant does all of that? The servant goes and finds Rebekah and brings her back, right?
No. That's a different story. I mean, between this story of the birthright, there's another little story that takes place with Isaac, and I believe there's dialogue in there. I'm not sure, but what you were alluding to, we're going to focus on now, the character of Isaac, the person that Isaac becomes, and this could get back to what Chris was saying before about the weakness of the patriarchs. Isaac is no day at the beach either. So let me bring the text up. So we're picking it up at the moment of the deception. So then he came to his father, Jacob, beg your pardon, my father, and he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me. Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have come so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come close that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. So he said, bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, that I may bless you. And he brought it to him, and he ate. He also brought him wine, and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, please come close and kiss me, my son. So he came close and kissed him. And when he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you of the earth, give you of the dew of the heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain and new wine. May peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. And there's a tremendous amount going on here. I'm going to start by saying one thing. I may have lost count, but I believe in this story, there are 5 instances where Isaac expresses some suspicion as to who's before him. And each one of those, for each one of those, Jacob has an answer, but I'm always left suspicious that Isaac is really convinced. But as is the custom in this dialogue, I'm going to let Chris get started. And if I have to, and anything I have to back clean up with, I will. But I want Chris to get started. This is just an incredibly rich little story, one wonderful story.
Well, first of all, I think, Jason, you raised a really interesting question about Isaac in terms of he's not a big talker, and to some degree, I think he comes across as somewhat damaged good. He may not be mute up until this juncture, but he's not a patriarch who is particularly active. His agency is not played up in this narrative. And again, I think this is symbolically conveyed by allusions to his blindness. And Phil and I were talking about some of the midrashim that swirl around this text. And one of my favorites is the story about why is it that Isaac can't see well. And the story, or the midrash that is developed, suggests that as during the Akedah, at the juncture wherein Isaac is bound and his father has pulled out the knife and is about to sacrifice him, the heartache that the father is experiencing leads him to weep profusely. And the tears are said to have fallen out of the eyes of Abraham into the eyes of Isaac. And if it doesn't blind him, it certainly throws his ability to see clearly out of kilter. So in a curious way, that the trauma that Isaac has endured by almost being sacrificed casts a shadow that continues to be displayed in this narrative. Isaac can't see well. Well, no wonder he can't see well, given the experience that he's had in his own family. And again, I think the portrait of Jacob here, you can put his mom, Rebecca, certainly wants to take responsibility, but Jacob is playing along and he is actively deceiving his father. And I think, again, there's a kind of curious dynamic at work here, given the series of questions that call upon his olfactory glands, his vision, his hearing, his sense of touch. All the senses come into play in terms of identifying the character. And in each case, the deception is played out. Some folks suggest that maybe Isaac had more of a clue about what was going on than meets the eye, and to some degree is rewarding his younger child for the ingenuity that is displayed, but ostensibly the text makes the deception unmistakably clear. And what does that say about the character of Jacob? Well, again, I don't find it to be a particularly flattering portrayal. These are not characteristics or a moral code that you would normally want to pass on to your children, would you? So anyway, it's an occasion has been set up that deepens and widens the divide between Esau and Jacob in light of this bit of trickery. Phil, you want to weigh in?
Well, one thing I want to point out, which I think I only saw recently in one of my innumerable readings of this text, is the issue of the goat skin that Rebecca puts on Jacob's arms to be as part of the disguise that he's his brother. Isaac puts his arm on Jacob's forearm, it would seem, and he feels the goat skin, and he recognizes in it the son Esau. Well, what does that tell you? Now here I think is a really interesting and perhaps negative characterization of Esau. It's not just that he's a hairy guy, right? I mean, we go to the beach and you see men who don't have hairy chests and hairy arms, and some guys who have really hairy arms. But nobody we see has hairy arms that are so hairy that it's like goat skin. But in putting his arm on the son and feeling the goat skin, he says, "Oh yeah, this is Esau." So this really portrays Esau in a much more negative light, I think, than we might normally assume. But then then Isaac says that famous line, right? The hands are the hands of Jacob. Sorry, the hands are the hands of Esau, and the voice is the voice of Jacob. And I might have it reversed. But there it gets back to what Rabbit said before about the nature of twins. This person we know in disguise is the representation of a totality that we are to some extent Esau, and we are to some extent Jacob. Our voices and our skins may differ from one another in terms of quality, in terms of character, in terms of our bodies, but we add up to one totality. Wendy, what's on your mind?
Well, one interpretation I've read in the past, sorry, is that Isaac wanted to be deceived and Isaac allowed himself to be deceived. So when a midrash one could write is about, okay, perhaps Isaac heard about Esau selling his birthright for dinner, and maybe that could have annoyed him. And it's like, okay, maybe if Esau doesn't value his birthright, maybe he doesn't deserve it if he's willing to trade it off for a bowl of stew. Obviously, that's conjecture. But for me, when I read the story with the bowl of soup or stew, it seems to me that Jacob is jealous of his brother's birthright, and that's why he makes the trade.
Well, that would seem right. But the same thing doesn't hold true. And in keeping an eye on the clock, I think we have time to look at this section where Esau comes into the scene. He wants that blessing. He doesn't spurn it the way he did with the birthright. I mean, there are all
Can I ask, are the birthright
Sure, can I finish
and
this sentence, please?
the blessing the same?
No, there seem to be
No.
different things.
Because if Esau sold his birthright or gave away his birthright to Jacob, why doesn't Jacob make that known to his father?
I don't know. We don't know that he didn't.
Yeah, but the point, the key point to understand is that the blessing has to be bestowed by the patriarch, by the father. Jacob cannot unilaterally lay claim to the blessing that endows him with the power and authority to be in charge of the family. That has to be passed on, verbally and through this ritual performance.
Are you saying then that the birthright would have been meaningless without the blessing? It wouldn't have given him any benefit?
Again, I think that the birthright is very poorly defined. We don't exactly know the contours of what the birthright consists of. But the family blessing, on the other hand, is precisely the bestowal of the authority and power of being in charge of the family. And it's given kind of global proportions in this beautiful blessing. On verse 29, where it says, "May people serve you and nations bow down to you, be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." So as you can see, the significance or the weight of what's being passed on is enormous. It's huge.
Yeah. Let me also point out at the very end of that, the text reads, "Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." That's exactly what God says to Abraham in chapter 12.
Yeah.
In Abraham, and God telling Abraham to move to Canaan. So this is the passing on of the covenant, and it's also the bestowal of a certain amount of power. So yeah, let's look at this. Let's look at this. What happens when Jacob, I beg your pardon, but bad ability to hold on to names. When Esau returns. So let's take a look at this. I think we have time to do this and look at the end of the story. Now it came about as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had hardly gone from the presence of Isaac, that Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting, and he had made a savory food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." Isaac, his father, said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am your son, your firstborn Esau." And Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was he then that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate of it before you came and blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed." When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Then he said, "Is it not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times." Now that's a pun on the name Jacob. Jacob means, one way of reading the word Jacob, it means heel grabber, like from the birth scene. "He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" But Isaac replied, "Behold, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given him as servants, and with grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now as for you, then, what can I do, my son? And Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me even also, my father." So Esau lifted his voice and wept. Now there is a little bit more. There is a blessing, and I didn't include that, but it's a much inferior blessing. And it's interesting, as Chris and I discussed yesterday, that the blessing once given can't be retracted. And I'm anxious for Chris's comments, but I do want to point out that it's not clear. It's very ambiguous whether whether Isaac is fooled or not. When he discovers that when Esau comes to him and he realizes he's been deceived, he trembles violently. And so it's not entirely clear that he becomes part of the game. We're not sure.
Yeah. I think this is one of the most poignant moments
It's true too, yes.
in the Bible. And I do think it's an empathetic portrayal. You can just imagine poor Esau coming in. He's been tricked, and he realizes that a blessing has been passed on to his trickster brother, and he issues a plea: "Don't you have another blessing that you can bestow on me?" And again, it kind of mirrors a psychological and even theological suspicion that there's an ethic of scarcity at work, that the father comes off as not quite having enough love to go around, or that the privileging of one, the elevation of one, entails the degradation or the lowering of the other. And so the rivalry that takes to take shape in this moment is really significant, and I think it casts a shadow that is, again, theological in nature, which is to suggest that one has to bend over backwards and perhaps go through all kinds of ethically questionable moves and procedures in order to position oneself as the favored and supreme recipient of God's blessing. And if you operate with this notion, God also is going to embrace and include some and exclude or ignore others, just as he did vis-a-vis Cain and Abel.
All right, so at this point, so Ezra asks, I'm sorry, can't get anybody's name right tonight. Jason asks a question: Does Isaac ever learn that Rebecca has anything to do with this situation? And I think that's one of those opportunities for you, for when you're retired, to write the midrash about that. I don't think I mean, one has to think that they must have had to talk about this afterwards. But there's nothing in the text itself that reveals that story. So that's a good.
Although I do think that it's the portrait of women in these stories is quite interesting, and it seems to me that what's conveyed is the power cannot be ostensibly exercised, and therefore to gain leverage in the shaping of the story, the practice of a trickster and some, if you will, what we might claim or judge as underhanded behavior gets played out, first of all, in terms of Sarah and her rivalry with Hagar, and then with Rebecca here, and then we're going to see it yet again with Rachel when she absconds with the idols of Laban.
Yeah.
That there's deception involved in that story too. So the portrait of women, it seems to me, is flattering in the sense that they are wily and they are ingenious, but in terms of appraising their ethical rectitude, they may be found a little bit wanting. But again, I think that sort of reflects or mirrors the cultural conditions in which women found themselves.
And even so, just staying with Rebecca, and going back to the moment when she meets the servant back in the old country that Abraham is sent to find a wife for Isaac, she's a very strong character.
Yeah.
All through her story, she's a strong character back there when Laban, who's her brother, says like, why don't you hang out? Laban has showered the family with all of this stuff, And Laban says to Rebecca, why don't you stay here for a while? Let him go home and you can follow. And there's a sense that Laban himself is being a little deceptive and may want to keep Rebecca. And Rebecca says, hell no, a deal's a deal. I'm going with him. And then when she encounters Isaac, there's this very dramatic and a little unclear moment that it seems she falls off the camel. It's not entirely clear. The language is a little ambiguous, but she's a very strong character, including and especially suggesting this deception, which raises the question anew: does she do the right thing? I mean, again, we're not the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, but does she do the right thing, or might the inheritance have come to Jacob in a more ethical manner? It's not clear. I'm going to ask the question again. Did she do the right thing? Is Esau so hairy that he's ultimately unworthy of the covenant? And I think this is a good moment to then turn to the very last part of the story, but a quick review. Rebecca and Isaac learn that Esau is so angry he wants to kill Jacob. So one or the other of them, I forget which, and I'm not going to turn to the text. I think it's Rebecca. Rebecca says, "Get out of Dodge,
Right.
and you got to go live with Uncle Laban for a while." And he leaves, and that's of course his first night away is when he has the dream of the ladder, the angels going up and down, and God standing right before him, and God comforting him. He gets to Uncle's house, and he wants to marry Rachel, but he ends up with Leah. I'm sorry, and has to work another 7 years for Rachel. 20 years go by, and God says it's time to go back home, and he goes back home. He hears that I'm really sorry. He hears that Esau is coming after him with 400 armed men, which makes him more than a little nervous. And he does a couple of things to do his best to protect his retinue. And he's left alone. He wrestles with some being all night. And it's at that point that he wrestles all night with this being. And the being says, the sun's rising, you got to let me go. And he says, not until you bless me. It's another little trickster thing, not until you bless me. And that's when he gets the name Yisrael, because you have wrestled with men, with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed. And that's the moment I think the text is telling us. And I don't think I'm telling the ending here. I think that's the moment the text is telling us he's a different person than he was 20 years ago. And so we're going to read the encounter now between him and Esau and ask the question again, if maybe it's too simplistic to put it this way: who's the good guy here and who's the bad guy? Or is one clearly a better character than the other? And I think the question is very much open for question. Let me get it. Let me bring it up.
So if I can interject, Phil, for a second.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
One of the things in the segment of the saga that we have not examined, but Phil was kind of rehearsing, was that Jacob to a degree is subjected to trickery that he in the past he had been the author of. Laban is switching his daughters around, and Jacob is duped. So again, this raises the question: is Jacob, in virtue of having gotten a taste of his own medicine, does that affect any kind of change in his character? And in a similar manner, Phil's reading of the story of Jacob's wrestling with the angel, coming away with a new name and a blessing, another kind of blessing. Is that a turning point in the character of Jacob? One of the aspects of this that again leaps out at me is that the encounter with the sacred is a wounding experience. It is a humbling experience, if not a humiliating experience. And as a consequence of this encounter with the sacred, with the divine, Jacob henceforth walks with a limp.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And just Derek forgot, by the way, he pulls that this being. I'm not ready to say it's an angel. The text doesn't say it's an angel. The text doesn't say it's a text. All the text says it's a man, but it's obviously a man endowed with some kind of supernatural power, matched by Jacob, who's able to wrestle all night with this character. So this being, whoever, whatever it is, Jacob is able to match him with power, but he walks away having the as Chris said, wounded in a place where in an animal is where sirloin steak is to be had, and as a result, people who observe the laws of kashrut are forbidden sirloin steak. When a kosher slaughterhouse slaughters an animal and cuts it up for food, the sirloin steak is sold to Ralph's or Vaughn's or someplace for non kosher eating. But let's look at this story now. Okay, so he's divided up his camp. He sent Esau an incredible amount of gifts to possibly to mollify him. And the question is always, why is he coming? Why is Esau coming with 400 men when a couple dozen would do if it's just a greeting committee? Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. These are all his all the women who have given him children. He's got sons and a daughter. He put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And please, if we don't say it, somebody remind me to comment on this, the falling on the neck and kissing him. It's a key moment here. And he lifted his eyes and he saw the women and the children, and he said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed. Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterwards, Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." Jacob said, "No, please. If now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please take my gift, which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us take our journey and go. I will go before you." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord pass on before his servant, and I will proceed at my leisure, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir." Esau said, please let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Jacob journeyed to Sukkot, built himself a house, and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Sukkot. So what is going on in this story? Very, very, very many interesting things. Chris, it's your shot.
Well, first of all, Jacob's ordering of the family is interesting in terms of who he puts up front And clearly, with 400 men, it would seem to me obvious that what Jacob anticipates is an onslaught. I mean, a releasing of anger and resentment and an attempt to get revenge for the abusive trickery to which he has been subjected by his older brother Esau. So I think he has that expectation that all hell is going to break loose, and his hope is that the rage will play itself out first on those that he values the least, and those that he cares for the most will be less likely to get slaughtered or captured or taken advantage of in some way. But on the other hand, Jacob goes ahead. He puts himself up front, and it's a very again another poignant moment in which Esau surprises the reader, not by acting on his resentment, but by running across the field, embracing his brother, and there seems to be this beautiful moment of rapprochement or reconciliation, even. So it looks as though this has been a surprising blessing that has emerged from the encounter of twins who, quite frankly, being twins, will be incomplete if they don't have some kind of relationship and perhaps some kind of intimacy with one another. But I'm intrigued with this question of why does Jacob go to such great lengths to pass on some of his booty, some of his bounty to his brother? I mean, he's very intent on making sure that a gift is given and a gift is received. And my suspicion is that there is a recognition on Jacob's part that he has taken something from his brother and he needs to repay a debt. And so that's why he bends over backwards. Now, it also seems to me curious that Esau seems very eager to have his brother Jacob return home with him. And I kind of envisioned this as a story of Rebecca and Isaac have gotten old. You know, they haven't been put in the memory care unit yet. But the depends may need to be changed. And he has been carrying the family burdens all by himself. And so I wonder if part of the reason that Esau is so glad to see his brother is finally there are reinforcements to help take care of my parents. That, of course, is a midrash or reading into the story what isn't necessarily there. But then something curious happens. Namely, having been given this invitation to return back home with Esau, Esau's offered guardians to assist in the transportation, in the movement of all this the goods that have been amassed by Jacob. And Jacob says, "No, go ahead. I'm just going to slow you down." But rather than go back home with Esau to be with his parents, to reunite with his family, he goes in a different direction. And he goes to Sukkot, where he establishes his home. So it again raises the question, has Jacob really changed, or is his dissembling, his failure to speak truthfully once again on display by deceiving his brother into thinking that he's going to return home and then he doesn't? So, once again, I think there's a fascinating question being raised about, has the character of Jacob changed over the course of this narrative? And yet I wanted to maybe give Jacob some credit here, because maybe what Jacob realizes is that sibling rivalries oftentimes have a way of what is repressed has a way of returning. And perhaps he suspects that while Esau on this occasion has been incredibly gracious and accepting, once he's back with his parents and those sibling rivalries and the dysfunction of the family dynamics can once again come into play, perhaps Jacob has realized that the safest thing for us to do, if we are going to avoid replicating the patterns of Cain and Abel, is for me to live at a safe distance from my brother Esau and from that dysfunctional dynamic that's been played out in the inner circle of his family.
Jason.
Yeah, the part that that makes me wonder about whether or not Jacob's changed is that if anyone should understand the dangers of a sibling rivalry, it's him, and playing favoritism is exactly what he ends up doing with his own kids. And he seems not to have learned any of the lessons of his own family, and he picks two youngers as his most favorites. And you know, what does that mean for Reuben and Simeon and all the ones who were the firstborn? You know, he's, and then I mean, I think it's all a very odd situation in that Judah's the one we end up looking at as our ancestor, and he's what, like the fourth born. So the whole thing gets kind of mucked up at this stage because you know, we have all of Joseph's grandeur as he arises on the scene later in Egypt. But I mean, the whole thing makes me just wonder, is it possible to say that Isaac learned anything from the battle with his brother? I mean, it's hard to say he did.
Yeah. Do not look to the book of Genesis for guidance on good parenting. No question about it. Wendy, what's on your mind?
Well, I was thinking at the end of this last story where Esau says, okay, we're going to go home. You go first and I'll follow you. And then Jacob says, oh, no. You go first. I'll follow you. And then Esau says, well, why don't I leave some of my men with you? And Jacob's like, no, I'm good. So it sounds to me there's some trust issues going on here. And maybe that Jacob doesn't trust that he'll be still treated the same way when he gets home, if there's this whole thing going on. So, and perhaps that's why Jacob said, even though things went well at the beginning, this may lead to something worse if I actually do go home, and maybe we should go in a different direction.
Yeah.
So another thing that I want to throw in there real quick, the one way that I like, one possible interpretation I like to think about with Jacob wrestling the angel story or the man or whatever it is what if we can internalize that and say, what if Jacob is struggling with what he has done, and the name change could signify he doesn't want to be deceptive anymore. He wants to change how he runs his life. But we know he's not that good at changing in that way. And so that's why the text will refer to him sometimes as Israel and sometimes as Jacob, because even though he wants to change and do better and not deceive, he's not always successful in that.
Yeah. I once tried to see if there's a pattern subsequently as to when this person is referred to as Jacob and when this person is referred to as Israel. And I couldn't see any pattern. Doesn't mean there isn't, but I couldn't find one. In the Psalms, at least in one case, but I know there's more than one case, it stands to have good. It gives us good poetic tools. But say Yisrael, Mi Mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov, Me'am Loez. It's a parallelism when. But say Yisrael, Mi Mitzrayim, when the house of Israel left Egypt. Beit Yaakov, Me'am Loez, the house of Jacob from a strange land. It's saying the same thing in two different ways. But as far as ordinary usage, I haven't been able to discern a pattern. I do want to say, and this has only come up slightly in the beginning in Chris's talk of typological analysis. The rabbinic tradition is a little uncomfortable with this ambiguity as to who Jacob is and who Esau is. And so Esau is characterized, and we would have to look at the midrashim and see the various ways. Esau is characterized as being pretty bad, and Jacob is characterized as being there are times Midrash is interested and happy with ambiguity, but not here, at least as far as I remember. Jacob is a good guy, Esau's a bad guy. And one way of knowing this is in the trope marks. The Torah notes that when Esau falls on Jacob and kisses him, the Hebrew I'm pretty sure is v'yana shake, and he kissed.
Yes.
And the trope mark over it is something called the shalshelet, which appears as only used no more than a half a dozen times. And it goes da 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 da. That's a very bad rendition, but it's a very long trope. It's like two measures, and here it's the Masoretes who assigned that note to this word would seem to say that Esau is actually being very ambivalent about this. He doesn't really want to kiss him; he wants to bite him. And along with that, and I don't know that this is true, but a teacher of mine once said that he'd heard that there was a Transylvanian rabbi who wrote a commentary on this story and thought and said that Esau was a vampire and he was actually trying to suck his blood. But that aside, the Masoretes being part of the rabbinic tradition, they're expressing their disbelief that Esau's kiss is sincere, it's disingenuous.
I mean, it's quite interesting that the word bite, the way in which the narrative gets reconstructed is that instead of Esau kissing, he goes to bite him, and the neck of Jacob, it turns to ivory, so that the teeth of Esau breaks. So when it goes on to say that they weep, well, Esau weeps because his teeth have just been broken, and Jacob weeps because he realizes that the possibility of reconciliation is a fantasy that cannot be realized. And again, it seems to me that inversion of the ostensible meaning, the plain meaning of the text, is one that emerges out of typological renderings of the story.
Right.
And it is impossible in the Middle Ages, indeed during the patristic period, it's impossible to imagine Christians and Jews affirming, embracing, and reconciling with one another. And so the story has to be reshaped and crafted to articulate the reality that's being lived in the streets and in their midst. And that is a reality in which Jacob and Esau, or Christians and Jews, or Jews and Romans, are at each other's throats.
I get a little bit of a message that beware the two-state solution.
Say more.
Say more?
Yeah.
Well, Jacob and Esau, he has no desire to be anywhere near his brother.
Yeah. Well, so in other words, are you suggesting that actually the rabbinic reformulation is the accurate and more realistic assessment of what the story really means or conveys?
Well, I would have to say I agree. I
Yeah,
agree with
because another way of reading the story, if you go with the ostensible meaning and you read it typologically as Palestinian and Israeli, that there could have been a moment of reconciliation, which suggests that a two-state solution may exactly be what's needed and what's possible, so that they can live at somewhat of a distance from each other, but they have reconciled in some way. So, you know, how you read this story and then layer it onto the complicated, complex reality of what's going on in Israel and Gaza, Palestine today, is open, it seems to me, to using the story in very different ways, as our traditions have done in the past.
Yeah. So something else I want to add, and then if Chris wants to have the last word, I'm happy to let him have it, but I let him have the last word, not let him have it. We don't know that Rebecca is still alive, but we know that Isaac is still alive because he dies subsequent to this story, and Esau and Jacob both show up at the funeral. Just like when Abraham dies, Ishmael and Isaac show up at that funeral. So there's a real parallel going on here. So that whatever's going on between the two brothers, forgetting about Ishmael and Isaac, whatever's going on between Esau and Jacob, they still feel obligated to come together to bury their father, which is just an interesting thing to point out here at the end. Chris, any last words?
Well, again, it seems to me that what, again, not to be too contemporary or try to be too current, the one thing that Palestinians and Israelis are going to need to do is they're going to need to bury the dead, and it just strikes me that it is at the moment of burying the dead that finally Jacob and Esau come back together or find some commonality or some common purpose. And if nothing else, there is mourning, there is grieving that will need to take place, and that grieving is going to know no boundaries.
Okay, any last questions? Well, services tomorrow night as usual, June the 13th, mark your calendar, Joan Friedman, Reform Judaism and Jewish law. And just a real quick reason, it's not that having her coming as the last speaker in this series that we've been running all year, that's just a coincidence. But I always find that people don't really have a deep knowledge of what Reform Judaism is. We all have in our heads, you know, that Reform Judaism means that we don't put any demands, that we rabbis don't put any demands on our congregants, and that's Reform Judaism. Well, it's a lot more than that, and there's a lot greater depth in that. And one of these is this continuing interaction between a set of definitions of what reform is over the generations, interacting with traditional Jewish law. So I think you might find this very interesting. But also, I want to thank Chris again. This is, I think, including these last two as two, I think this is the 5th time we've had this kind of point counterpoint. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right.
I think we did it 3 times in Missouri. One time, remember, Roy was the interlocutor between us. Your friend Roy Diamond, our good friend Roy Diamond. All right, so good night, Shabbat Shalom. See you on the streets of Riverside and in the shul.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you joining us again.
Yeah,
Thank you
all. It was wonderful to be with you. And while Phil and I may not be twins, we have wrestled with each other over many decades.
Yeah.
And
always on Zoom. Always on Zoom. It's all psychical.
And we see which one has the hairier face. So I'm not judging, but
yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for pointing that out.
I hope you're not planning to come, Jason. I hope you're not planning to come to services tomorrow. Lila Tov, everybody.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Very much. Very.
Thanks a lot. Be well.
It is.